I'm really excited to introduce Janani Ramachandran, candidate for California State Assembly District 18. She is a social justice lawyer and IEB member running for California State Assembly District 18 in the upcoming 2021 special election. She's running a corporate-free campaign and is fighting for bold, progressive policies. She will bring a community-driven perspective to Sacramento based on her experiences working directly with immigrant mothers, tenants facing eviction, survivors of domestic violence, and individuals in mental health crises. She has previously served as an Oakland Public Ethics Commissioner and is currently a California Commissioner for API American Affairs and board director at 3 local nonprofits. She's a graduate of Stanford and Berkeley Law. If elected, Janani would be California's first South Asian and first LGBTQ API Assemblywoman. We are really excited to have her here. One quick housekeeping note is that she will be sticking around for Q&A after her remarks. That's a great time to ask questions about her campaign or about her stances on the issues. But if you have questions about Indivisible East Bay's endorsement process, please save those for Breakout E, which covers endorsement questions because we want to be mindful of the candidate's time while we have her here. So without further ado, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon for those of you who haven't met me yet, as introduced. My name is Janani Ramachandran. I'm an East Bay native and a social justice attorney and a proud Indivisible East Bay member. So I am running for California State Assembly now because of the monumental crises that California currently faces and what I believe is the need for bold solutions. 1 in 3 Californians live at or near the poverty line, yet we are the wealthiest state in the nation. Every 3 hours, a Californian dies from a gunshot wound, yet we apparently have some of the country's toughest gun laws. 160,000 Californians are houseless on a given night. 2 million homes are under extreme risk for wildfires next year, and over 3 million Californians lack access to health care even during the pandemic. So I believe we need bold action now. I'm running on a platform that's building a movement to fight for 5 key things. First, a true living wage, because it is tragic that half of Californians living in poverty work a full-time job, and a living wage will both lift families out of poverty while strengthening our economy. 2, I'm fighting for more affordable housing and stronger tenant protections, including Ellis Act reform, which Indivisible helped advocate for earlier this year. 3, I'm fighting for a truly equitable justice system that works for all of us, starting by ending qualified immunity for police officers who commit harm, and also investing in restorative justice and other community violence interventions, including some of the nonprofits I've worked with in the district for the past few years. 4th, I'm fighting for Medicare for all because as a former community health worker myself, I understand the life-saving value of preventative care and coverage. Finally, I am fighting for a Green New Deal so that all of us can breathe clean air and have a sustainable future moving forward while creating hundreds of thousands of well-paid green energy jobs. So a quick background on myself and how I got to wanting to do this now. I was born and raised in the East Bay, attended Stanford, and then worked at a community health clinic for a few years, providing in-home case management services to immigrant moms, most of whom were survivors of domestic violence and also housing insecure. And my experiences doing this work, watching families be ripped apart by our inequitable systems of justice, watching some of our most vulnerable community members often be hurt by the very laws intended to protect them, these experiences inspired me to go to law school to think more deeply about how I can be part of movements that are changing and challenging these systems. So during my legal education and legal career so far, I've defended elderly tenants in Oakland facing eviction. I've represented survivors of domestic violence fighting tooth and nail at court just to get a shot at safety for themselves and for their children. And I've worked and have continued to work with individuals experiencing mental health crises in Oakland. And I want to run now because the voices of these communities have been silenced for too long. Their voices have been drowned out by politicians and political leaders that are too scared to push for change and too scared to fight back against big corporate power. I'm running a campaign that is not accepting money from and direct checks from corporations, police unions, big pharma, the oil and gas industry and their executives, and of course, all real estate developers. And as mentioned, this race does have the opportunity to make history. If elected, I would be California's first South Asian Assemblywoman and our first LGBTQ API Assemblywoman. So that's a little bit about my platform and my background. Thank you for considering endorsing my candidacy. It would mean the world to have the support of an organization that works in California and nationally for real progressive change. And I am absolutely ready to pour every ounce of my energy into building a movement for a more equitable California. And I'm eager to work alongside all of you in helping build this movement and amplify the powerful work Indivisible is already doing. I am happy to answer some questions now.
And I'll feel free to put questions in the chat, or also you're feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
How do I see making more affordable housing available? So affordable housing, unfortunately, means a lot of things to different people, and the reality is it's not working. It's housing that's considered affordable really isn't for a lot of folks, particularly in the East Bay and particularly communities that are currently being displaced. So one of the programs that I personally support is the recent social housing bill that was introduced by Buffy Wicks and Alex Lee, and I know it was one of the bills that IEB has chosen to support in the past. It's clear that, unfortunately, our private housing market cannot afford to, for various reasons, build enough housing that's truly affordable because of the cost of permits, because of the cost of building itself, and the housing that's being considered affordable right now really isn't for the majority of people who need it. But something that I personally believe in is, in addition to, we can't build more housing unless without also thinking about stronger tenant protections. So for example, now, any new buildings constructed in Oakland and in Berkeley will not be rent controlled because of Costa-Hawkins. And the damage that Costa-Hawkins is unfortunately causing is preventing local jurisdictions from being able to enact the tenant protections that they choose to. So that's one of my, there's some stances on affordable housing. This is a much longer conversation, of course. When is the special election? It is probably going to be in August. Rob Bonta just got confirmed 2 days ago by the state legislature to be our attorney general. So Newsom has 2 weeks now to decide when he wants to set the date for the election. It's almost certainly going to be in August, and if and when there's a runoff, which is pretty likely in this district, given the number of people that have launched their campaigns, that's probably going to be in November. Do you think we can establish universal health care in California? Absolutely, and I care very deeply about passing a single-payer health care plan as early as possible. I mean, we're having national conversations about single-payer health care, about a Green New Deal, about raising the minimum wage, and these are things that California hasn't even been able to do yet. But there are two reasons why I think this time is different. Unfortunately, I know AB 1400 got converted into a 2-year bill, but that leaves more time for community education and to get the support of more and more labor unions on board. The last time it was introduced in, I believe, 2017, we didn't have the national, I mean, we were under Trump, and it was extremely unlikely that we were going to get some of the federal waivers we need to actually implement a true impactful single-payer healthcare program. So the combination of having Biden, Harris, Becerra, Padilla in our state government, all of whom, for sure, Becerra and Padilla, who are supportive of a single-payer healthcare for California, the combination of that, plus the fact that more people understand what a single-payer healthcare system looks like, I think makes this moment different. Another reason that makes this moment different is us understanding some of the vast racial inequities in healthcare in a different way. COVID has exposed and laid bare so many of the health inequities that have been present for generations, but we're seeing that now. Deep East Oakland and West Oakland suffer disproportionately higher rates of COVID, and unsurprisingly, disproportionately high lack of insurance or underinsurance. A Black mother is 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than a white mother is. And these are things that have long gone on and are partly, now we're understanding parts of
that you're
problems
putting these.
are lack of health care, lack of preventative care. So I believe that this moment is different and we do have the ability to pass it. How can we overcome the controlling influence of oil companies, police prison associations, etc., on state policy? So right now, 70 to 80% of California state legislators accept contributions from oil and gas corporations, including, I believe, about 70% of Democratic legislators as well. A huge part of the reason I believe we're not making the progress that I know many people in this room want to see on climate change and not passing the Green New Deal has to do with campaign contributions and the power of oil and gas and Chevron. But we are seeing now more than ever a strong support for the anti-fracking bill, which didn't proceed in the way we wanted it to, but there's a coalition of people that were supportive of it. There are more and more people increasingly that are getting on board with supporting a Green New Deal and the various bills that are going to need to pass for us to get there. So I believe that one big step to minimizing the influence of the oil and gas industry is by first having candidates openly refuse to take contributions from the oil and gas industry, and also continue to build the movements that are already forming. And same thing when it comes to universal healthcare. I think this moment is different, not only because of COVID, but because of our environmental catastrophes. People understand the impact that our wildfires are having. People understand that our coastlines will slowly recede away, that islands might go underground in a few decades. And there's more of a urgency, I certainly believe, in getting something passed now because of the extent of the crisis. When it comes to police and prison associations, same thing. Prison guard unions in particular are powerful. They spend a couple of $1 million every year on state assembly races and state senate races, and also on legislation, which is why, a lot of the media has reported as last year's qualified immunity attempt, which was a bill that would basically decertify police officers who were convicted of misconduct. That bill didn't even get to the floor vote. And, there are reasons for this. It's something that, given the moment of the last legislative cycle and us waking up to racial injustices in policing and massive movements and protests all over the state, all over the country, there is unfortunately massive power that the police and prison guard unions have. And it's not just me. In 2022 and 2024, there are going to be dozens, if not, I believe, upward of 40 seats in the state senate and state assembly that are going to be open. So the more that we elect progressive leaders, starting with the 2021 special election, continuing on to next year, and then 2 years after that, the more we can build a stronger coalition of true progressives who are not accepting money from these special interest groups and drive forward change. What can be done in Alameda around policing? So the two things I feel strongly about is related to policing, is ending qualified immunity, as I mentioned before, but also supporting local community organizations that are doing the work. It's different to have a conversation about defunding and all of that, but what the state can do to support effort to build towards real public safety is investing in community organizations that are doing the work. For example, one of the groups in Oakland that I'm involved with is called MH First, Mental Health First, and it's a weekend nighttime hotline where trained community members, most of whom have social work backgrounds or hotline backgrounds or clinical backgrounds of some kind, are first responders. So we answer calls on weekend nights where your only option if you're experiencing a mental health crisis is to call the police. Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, the county offers non-police services. You have social workers who will come out and dispatch, but at the times when people often are really experiencing mental health crises, we lack those services. The district does include Alameda and San Leandro, and I've connected with organizations in both of these cities who want to bring this model to Alameda as well, who want to bring these hotline services to San Leandro as well. And the second thing is police oversight. Oakland has a police oversight commission that is getting stronger and more powerful in ways that are good. Alameda and San Leandro don't have that yet, and I know a lot of activist groups on the ground are interested in bringing some of these police oversight boards, people who are appointed through a democratic process, not just a mayor's appointees or a council member appointees. There's interest in bringing citizen-led oversight commissions. And the final way I think that we can think about policing in Alameda, which is relevant now more than ever because of the death of Mario Gonzalez this past week, is our Attorney General, and having us make sure that holding Rob Bonta accountable and holding people in his office accountable to launch independent investigations, which he has the authority to do. Unfortunately, and I really do hope that he does, and I think the more community pressure we can apply, the better. Unfortunately, Javier Becerra did not investigate a lot of police shootings, and nor does the Alameda County DA for various reasons. So I think an independent investigation into police misconduct at the state level will be helpful. What kinds of connections have you made with other California Assembly members? What experience do you have working in the California legislative process? So I'm familiar with a handful of legislators who I consider progressive. I've talked to and had lengthy conversations over the past few months, past year really, with Alex Lee, Ash Kalra, Buffy Wicks, John Laird, a handful of other folks, Lorena Gonzalez, people who I know who are trying to push the needle and and promote public policies. As far as the California legislative process goes, my most meaningful and educational experiences have been through my former work at the Family Violence Appellate Project. So we're a nonprofit based in Oakland, but we do statewide work. So I was previously on their board, and then I became a staff member, and I've been volunteering with them for the past 4 years. And a lot of the work that we've done is advocating for policies alongside the California Coalition to End Domestic Violence on domestic violence bills that have an intersectional lens. And by that I mean, there are a lot of anti-violence movements historically that are focused on police and prosecuting, but are not adequately thinking about the intersections between tenants' rights and domestic violence, between workers' rights and domestic violence, between mental health and domestic violence. So some of the work that I've done through my role at Family Violence Appellate Project was working with legislators to think intersectionally about domestic violence. Unfortunately, on the other hand, I've been exposed to some of the bureaucracy around it. There are a lot of very well-meaning legislators who sometimes promote bills to make them look good without understanding the scope of the problem. So my organization has spent a lot of effort working with legislators to stop passing domestic violence bills that are going to ultimately cause more harm than good, because it comes down to the details and having the voices of people who are survivors themselves, who understand what a family law courtroom looks like, who understand the ways in which the laws can be used to criminalize survivors, to harm the very people they're meant to protect. So while I've worked on advocacy on housing issues, including our last statewide eviction moratorium, the Ellis Act, a couple of workers' rights bill, including expanding paid sick leave, the bill supporting reparations. Those are, all bills that I've advocated for, testified for, written letters of support for. But my best insight into the real nuances of the process have been through the lens of domestic violence work, as well as tenants' rights work. Position on immigration reform. How will you work with other state legislators to ensure immigrant essential workers are supported during COVID? Absolutely. That's one of the bills that I've publicly supported and drafted letters of support for was SB 95, which is to protect workers who contract COVID or have family members with COVID and enabling them to take a select number of days of paid sick leave. And that was an important bill at the time because the FFCRA the federal protections had lapsed on December 31st. And some level of protections have gone into effect again, but there was a several-month window where if you got COVID, you had to make the choice between going into work and possibly needing to put food on your table, or taking care of yourself and preventing the spread of COVID. And this was especially true for agriculture workers. It's especially true for essential workers, many of whom truly did go in knowing that they had been exposed to COVID or knowing that a family member had COVID because they needed to put food on their table. So that's important to me, not just during COVID, but in the post-pandemic recovery period. I mean, just because we're getting vaccines doesn't mean that these issues are going to go away, and workers absolutely need to be able to have that protection to also deal with the long-term impacts of COVID. People who have experienced it we're seeing, it's not just the handful of weeks they test positive, but it can be many, many months of long-term effects, and I think workers need to be adequately protected for that. I also care about expanding, outside of COVID, our paid sick leave in general. Right now, we only have 3 days of paid sick leave, which is a step up from the 1 day I believe we had before and the 0 days we had a couple of years ago, but we're the only developed country in the world to not have real paid sick leave, and people need to be able to take care of themselves and their families when they're sick and not expose other people to it to their illnesses as well. And immigration reform, I absolutely believe more people need to be offered pathways to citizenship. And a lot of that is for sure on the federal level, but there are plenty of things that state lawmakers can do to support that process. One of the bills I care very deeply about now is the Vision Act, which will curb and hopefully end the prison to ICE pipeline, which sadly goes on every single day. There's a group I've worked with for the past few years called Survived and Punished, and they work with a lot of survivors of human trafficking, domestic violence, who are incarcerated for crimes they committed because of abuse. Many, the overwhelming majority of whom that are in jail are immigrants, many of whom are undocumented. So the day that they're released from jail, if they've spent 15, 20, 25 years in jail, they're often just handed right over to ICE rather than released homes. Often refugees from countries who haven't been to their home countries since they were 2 or 3 years old. That's one specific thing I think that the California as a state government can work on to curb. Ceasefire on gun violence reduction. I take that question to mean how do we reduce and do something about that horrible statistic I mentioned earlier. I think it's a combination of two things. One are, we have strong gun violence policies, but we can do more. There are states like Massachusetts, for example, that have enacted safe storage laws, for example. So right now, California, there are only limited circumstances where someone needs to safely store a gun away from other people. But I think owning a gun in any means, we need to have a law that says they must be safely stored under all circumstances, and follow the lead of other states who have enacted that. There's also gun violence restraining orders, which is a very underutilized form of a civil restraining order, where we're completely outside of the criminal justice system, but just in the civil court system, an individual who believes that for whatever reason someone they have a credible reason to believe that someone has a gun and will harm them, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's gang violence, whether it's community members. A gun violence restraining order would allow someone to be protected in the workplace and home, mandate a certain number of feet that that person they fear has a gun and will use it against them will have to stay away. And there's current legislation right now to strengthen the gun violence restraining order process, and I think we can do more. But the other big issue as far as gun violence goes, which we know has increased exponentially during the pandemic, especially in Oakland, is prevention. You know, we need to give high school students and middle school students better, pathways to community violence intervention programs. One of the groups that I work with in the district is called Men Creating Peace. And it's a restorative justice model where former perpetrators of violence and former perpetrators of harm founded the program and lead groups of mostly men to prevent the cycle of violence from continuing. And I know the graduates of the program, they sit on the board, they've done incredible things, and unfortunately, it's a program that's going under during COVID. Our state has not been adequately supporting community interventions that have proven results, mental health services that have proven results, culturally focused models of community violence prevention and healing that we know actually work. So a lot of the issue of gun violence, in my opinion, is about prevention among youth and among folks, coming from folks who understand the world and have committed harm themselves. The connection, please speak to the connection between racial injustice, environmental injustice, economic injustice, and the pending Howard Terminal Oakland A's debate. So these things are inextricably linked. And the first time I really understood that is when I was working with immigrant moms and doing home visiting services. When I learned that Black mothers experience 3 to 4 times higher maternal mortality rate, I also learned that the answer was not 9 months of prenatal care, better vitamins. That's not the answer. It's social determinants of health. It's whether that mom breathes clean air, whether that mom grew up in a home with violence, whether they have and had economic security, whether they have access to healthy food in grocery stores, or whether they live in a food desert. So I believe that we need to think more deeply about these connections, because unfortunately a lot of legislation tends to pigeonhole these things. When we talk about racial injustices, bills that address racial injustice as a problem, call out API hate, call out Black, police brutality, these things are helpful, but one thing that I would want to bring is an intersectional lens, thinking about racial justice in every single bill, whether it's on the environment, whether it's on economic recovery. As far as Howard Terminal and the Oakland A's goes, I feel like, the voices of longtime West Oakland residents and Deep East Oakland residents have been left out for the sake of billionaire profits. And, this is a project that will cost taxpayers almost $1 billion. It's not privately funded. There's a lot of rhetoric around, yes, this is privately funded, we'll take care of it. But realistically, there's so much toxic waste cleanup that has to happen at the site. There's so much infrastructure development that has to happen at the site. And it is going to cost millions of dollars of taxpayer money. And while I can't control what the A's do and don't do, I know that if they move, we need a really strong community benefits agreement. There are 3,000 condos that are being considered developed there. We don't have a number for how many are going to be actual affordable housing or a metric to define what affordable housing means. We don't have solutions to dealing with the pedestrian traffic and the railroad crossing and safety and things like that. So if this project does move forward, I believe it needs a really strong community benefits agreement and some sort of mitigation on this massive amount of taxpayer money that should be going towards our post-pandemic economic and health recovery.
Thank you. So I think we're getting towards time. Thank you so much for all of these really detailed responses. So much appreciated. And thank you for being with us today. So I think we are going to transition into to a stretch break. But if there's anything you'd like to put in the chat for people to follow up or look up anything on your positions or anything like that, feel free to go for it. And thank you so much for taking the time to give us these really detailed responses. I think it helps so much. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me for anything. Thanks for considering it.